It's really commendable. And I, by the way, hope that you know what UNCTAD is. It's the UN Trade and Development Agency. And as Chris said, we have been supporting developing countries on trade, on digital transformation, on debts, on many other issues for more than 60 years. So we are living in a time when trade policy news are making frequent headlines and generate widespread uncertainty for countries, businesses, and communities alike. Today, I would like to share reflections from UNCTAD, from UN Trade and Development, on what is happening to global trade and the growing uncertainty we are seeing, and suggest some pathways to help navigate these challenges. Let me begin with some encouraging news. In 2024, and that was mentioned before, global trade in goods and services reached a record $33.2 trillion, an increase of 4% over 2023. This reflects the resilience of global trade, even in the face of severe disruptions such as the war in Ukraine or the crisis in the Red Sea. For many developing countries, trade remains a lifeline. It generates jobs, supports livelihoods, and provides essential government revenue. However, this year, trade tensions have intensified, creating new levels of uncertainty and instability. Since the start of the year, the United States has announced several unilateral tariff increases, some targeting specific countries, others specific sectors or products. These measures restrict market access for all trading partners, including many countries that barely contribute to global trade imbalances. UNCTAD has pointed out that these measures hit vulnerable countries the hardest, many of them members of the Commonwealth. Least developed countries, for instance, account for only 1.5% of the US trade deficit, yet they are among those most affected by these new tariffs. Unilateral trade measures are not new, but their numbers have increased dramatically in the past decade. Between 2010 and 2014, the average number of new trade policy interventions, both liberalizing and restrictive, stood at approximately 190 per year. 190 per year, but between 2020 and 2024, this number surged to over 1,200 per year. Such measures erode confidence in the WTO-based multilateral trading system, which has provided stability and predictability, particularly for developing countries. They also threaten the preferential market access that developing countries enjoy under programs such as the Generalized System of Preferences or the African Growth and Opportunity Act. Trade policy uncertainty comes with big costs. It discourages investment, disrupts supply chains, delays business decisions, and leads to costly and inefficient adjustments. It also accelerates trends such as friendshoring, where trade and investment shift toward politically aligned partners, further fragmenting global trade. So, ladies and gentlemen, the big question is how to handle this new, more uncertain global trade landscape. And let me offer 4 brief points for consideration. First, the growing value of regional markets. A prime example is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement area. As UNCTAD's Secretary General, Rebecca Grispan, my boss, recently emphasized in Côte d'Ivoire, full implementation of the AFCFTA can make Africa emerge stronger, more resilient, and more competitive. Combined with infrastructure investment, the AFCFTA could create a $3.4 trillion market. Intra-African trade remains one of the continent's greatest untapped opportunities. It is more diversified and higher in value added than trade with external partners. In 2024, intra-African trade grew by an impressive 9%, yet it still represents only 16% of total African exports. We also know that trade within deep regional trade agreements has proven almost twice as resilient as trade outside such agreements. Strengthening intra-Commonwealth trade presents similar opportunities, both for growth and for building resilience. Not only regional trade, but also South-South trade offers significant growth opportunities. Notably, between 2018 and 2023, South-South trade expanded annually on an average 5.5%, outpacing North-North trade for the first time, which grew by only 3.3%. So we are seeing now more South-South trade than North-North. This shift underscores the rising economic strength and influence of the Global South. Over the past 3 decades, the Global South's share of global output has more than doubled, rising from 18% to 40%. Its share of global merchandise exports increased from 25% to 44%, while its share of inward foreign direct investment soared from 30% to 65%, more than double. As a result, the Global South has emerged as a key driver of economic transformation, presenting promising market opportunities for developing countries. Second point, reducing trade costs through trade facilitation. Trade facilitation is a powerful driver for competitiveness. By simplifying and modernizing border procedures, we can significantly lower transaction costs and reduce delays. And I have to mention here an excellent example, which is Namibia, precisely. By using a reform tracker, building capacity, and developing a trade facilitation roadmap, Namibia raised its implementation score for the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement from 26% in 2023 to 86%, from 26 to 86% by early 2025. With what that's implied, for example, for the Trans-Kalahari border, streamlining customs clearance has helped traders save over $3 million and over 200,000 hours every year. We are proud to have supported Namibia through the Accelerate Trade Facilitation Program alongside the World Customs Organization and the United Kingdom. Namibia's experience also highlights the value of Commonwealth cooperation in sharing best practices and building resilient trade systems. My last point, strengthening entrepreneurship and supporting MSMEs. Micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, MSMEs, are the backbone of our economies. In Africa only, SMEs account for approximately 80% of employment. Yet many MSMEs struggle to get affordable financing, adopt new technologies, and build resilience against crisis. Supporting MSMEs means having solid policies in place, access to credit, mentoring, and market linkages. I also want to stress how important it is to foster youth entrepreneurship, especially with Africa's young and dynamic population. UNCTAD, together with the Commonwealth Secretariat, has issued a policy guide to strengthen youth entrepreneurship based on our entrepreneurship framework. We are updating this framework to address both digital and sustainable transition. I would like to close by talking on seizing opportunities that arise from the current context. The Red Sea crisis at the end of 2023 and early 2024 caused major disruptions to global shipping routes. Vessels had to go around the African continent, adding about 12 days to trips between Asia and Europe, increasing transit times by about 30%. However, this also meant a sharp rise in vessels' arrivals at African ports, particularly in South Africa, opening new opportunities for maritime trade. To make the most of these changes, African countries need to invest in port infrastructure, boost cargo handling capacity, and improve coordination among border agencies. With the right investments, disruptions can turn into new opportunities for trade growth. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the world is dynamic, and this is not new. As we move into a more multipolar world, with a rising global south, many new opportunities will emerge. But to seize these opportunities, we need resilience, innovation, cooperation, and a commitment to an open, predictable, and inclusive trading system, echoing the words of the Secretary General of the Commonwealth this morning. So in UNCTAD, we stand ready to support countries in this journey. And again, thank you for having us today, sharing our insights. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Deputy Secretary General. And on to my final speaker, Dr. Yemi Kale, who's the Managing Director and Group Chief Economist at Afreximbank, which is one of the key multilateral development banks, especially in this region, that helps underpin resource, finance, and make trade happen, especially in developing economies. Over to you, Dr. Kale.
Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's usually tricky to be called to speak last. You run the risk of being asked to speak very quickly if you have run out of time. You also run the risk of repeating what has already been said by distinguished panelists. But that also creates an advantage. It means that I can actually speak faster because I can try to avoid repeating some of the same points that other panelists have already stated. But first, I want to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity on behalf of the Africa Export-Import Bank to make these brief remarks at this year's summit, which we have heard repeatedly over and over is occurring at a decisive moment for global trade and international cooperation. We are already aware that we are witnessing a current global and trade environment that is defined not only by uncertainty, but by the urgent need to build resilience. In recent years, we have witnessed an unprecedented confluence of shocks, a global pandemic, supply chain collapses, inflationary pressures, climate-related disruptions, and rising geopolitical fragmentation. These are no longer passing anomalies. They are rather they are shaping a new global order. And in this order, efficiency alone is no longer sufficient. What now determines success is resilience. Resilience in our economies, resilience in our trading systems, and resilience in our institutions. And this is precisely why the Commonwealth, with its 56 diverse but interconnected economies spanning every continent, must reimagine itself. I like the use of the word, the example that was used in terms of using football as a way to explain. I think that's what we have to do now as a Commonwealth. We have to reimagine ourselves, not just as a legacy network of shared history, but as a forward-facing platform for resilient and inclusive growth in an increasingly volatile global economy. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the past 5 years have profoundly altered the rules of global commerce. Since 2020, more than 3,000 more than 3,000 trade restrictive measures have been introduced by G20 economies alone. Multilateralism, once the anchor of global trade stability, is under pressure, and the global trading system is fragmenting into new blocks defined more by strategic rivalry than by open cooperation. For many Commonwealth countries, particularly the low and middle-income economies, this volatility has exposed deep vulnerabilities. Commodity dependence, narrow export bases, and limited financial buffers have left many countries acutely sensitive to external shocks. Moreover, with trade costs rising and access to key markets becoming more complex, the urgency to rethink, the urgency to rebuild has never been greater. Yet, within this uncertainty lies a critical opportunity, an opportunity to realign our trade relationships through deeper regional cooperation, through technological innovation, and through inclusive financing models that strengthen the foundation for sustainable trade resilience. While multilateral institutions like ours at Afreximbank remain indispensable, the experiences of other regional trade blocs have shown that resilience increasingly emerges from regional integration, from the creation of ecosystems that bind markets together, not just through trade, but through shared infrastructure, through harmonized regulation, and through institutional trust. The Asian bloc, for example, offers a compelling case. In response to rising global fragmentation, the region recently concluded negotiations on an upgraded free trade agreement with China, thereby expanding its scope into digital trade, green industries, and investment facilitation. Moreover, initiatives like the Asian single window have streamlined customs across member states, reducing clearance times and enabling digital cross-border documentation that now supports 9 out of its 10 members. Similarly, the European Union has embedded resilience into its trade framework through initiatives like the EU-Mercosur Agreement and the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Now, these initiatives combine liberalization with strict environmental standards, regional manufacturing incentives, and shared digital infrastructure. What these examples illustrate is that regional platforms are not only complements to multilateralism, but also they are fast becoming its most functioning building blocks. They allow countries to move at a shared pace, to respond to shocks collectively, and to build mutually reinforcing capabilities in infrastructure, in finance, and in innovation. However, we do know that even the most integrated regional platforms can falter if they fail to bring along the largest but most undeserved segment of the economy. That is the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Across the Commonwealth, MSMEs account for more than 80% of employment in many countries, yet they remain vastly underreported in global trade. One of the central barriers these MSMEs face is access to trade finance. The global trade finance gap, which is estimated at $2.5 trillion, disproportionately affects MSMEs in emerging markets, especially in Africa, South Asia, and the Caribbean. Learning from other regions, once again, can, however, offer important lessons. In Southeast Asia, for example, governments have partnered with fintech platforms to create digital trade finance ecosystems. An example is Thailand's National Digital Trade Platform, which connects MSMEs directly to domestic banks and e-customs. Also in Singapore and Abu Dhabi, they have piloted blockchain-enabled platforms like TradeNet to enhance credit access and invoice verification. At Afreximbank, at the African Export-Import Bank, we have also moved decisively in this space. Our guarantee programs, which confirm lines for local banks, our ATEX marketplace, our Export Development Fund, are all helping MSMEs in African countries overcome financing barriers and access wider markets. But to truly transform MSMEs' participation in trade, we must scale these efforts into a Commonwealth-wide blended finance facility supported by development financial institutions and member states, a facility that pools risks, standardizes documentation, and supports regional trade corridors tailored to MSMEs' participation. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the cost of trade in many Commonwealth developing countries remains unacceptably high. Exporting a container from sub-Saharan Africa, for example, still costs almost 3 times more than in OECD countries. For example, it took me about 16 hours to get from Cairo to Namibia, and I had to cross 3 different countries. These are kind of the challenges that we face within our countries, within the continent. So this is not simply due to geography. It is due to inefficiencies such as manual custom processes, underdeveloped port infrastructure, and siloed regulatory systems. It is precisely where digital transformation can be a game changer. Again, I'll take an example from the Asian region. The Asian single window and its move towards paperless trade, for example, has demonstrated how smart customs, e-certificates of origin, and real-time data sharing can reduce trade delays by up to 50%. Similarly, in the European Union, the adoption of blockchain-based systems like TradeLens and the deployment of artificial intelligence for customs risk profiling has also dramatically increased supply chain visibility. The Commonwealth must therefore pursue similar ambitions. It is time for us to consider establishing a Commonwealth digital trade infrastructure plan focused on establishing interoperable single windows, shared electronic documentation standards, and digital identification systems. Doing this could cut trade costs significantly, while also making trade more inclusive and transparent across the Commonwealth. This will also open the door for broader participation in digital trade agreements, enabling Commonwealth countries to align with emerging trends and standards on data governance, cybersecurity, and digital payments. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, beyond finance and digital tools, trade resilience increasingly depends on how countries structure their physical and productive ecosystems. In response to pandemic-era shortages and geopolitical shocks, blocs like the European Union have shifted towards reshoring and friendshoring, investing heavily in regional production of critical goods such as semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and green technologies. Now, these shifts are enabled by digital traceability tools, AI-powered risk management platforms, and collaborative public-private investment frameworks. For example, the EU's digital twin supply chain initiative uses real-time climate and logistical data to predict disruptions and rebalance supply networks. For the Commonwealth, this presents a clear path forward. By investing in regional production hubs, whether in green minerals, whether in value-added agri-processing or in pharmaceuticals, we can not only reduce dependency on external supply chains, but also build new engines of trade-driven industrializations. Such hubs should be digitally enabled, environmentally sustainable, and financed through a combination of public-private partnerships and trade-linked financing instruments. To bring these elements together, we should consider the establishment of a Commonwealth Resilience Pact, a practical framework grounded in the following 4 pillars. The first pillar is inclusive trade finance, establishing a blended finance facility targeting MSMEs and women-led exporters, building on initiatives like the one I mentioned earlier that we're already adopting at like the Asian regional digital finance models. The second pillar is digital trade infrastructure, investing in shared customs systems, e-documentation standards, and platforms that allow seamless cross-border trade. The third pillar is diversified value chains, co-financing regional hubs in strategic sectors, green minerals, pharmaceuticals, agri-food systems, and so on, modeled on EU-style production realignment, which I had discussed earlier. The final pillar is risk-sharing and response mechanisms. This involves developing Commonwealth-wide early warning systems, sovereign risk buffers, and trade disruption insurance tools inspired by resilience initiatives. In conclusion, distinguished colleagues, if we are to navigate the uncertainty of this era, we must act not just with ambition, but with coordination and urgency. The challenges we face today, whether fragmented trade, financial exclusion, technological divides, they are all shared. But so too is our potential to respond. The Commonwealth has the institutions, it has the talent, and the shared values to craft a new model of trade cooperation, one that is inclusive, one that is digital, climate conscious, and fundamentally resilient. It's my opinion that it is time for us in the Commonwealth to move from principles to platforms, from dialogue to delivery, and from adapting to the changing global environment to helping to shape it. Once more, I thank you for the opportunity to make this few remarks, and I thank you all for listening. Thank you.
So just quickly to conclude, I think from a business point of view, it's pretty clear it's challenging out there. The world trade order is changing, but there are opportunities to make trade cheaper, faster and simpler for everybody, and we've heard about some of that today. I love this idea that the Commonwealth is key, but we're a talented team. We can do a lot. We can be that champion network for international trade rules, trade standards, innovation. But most importantly of all, let's make sure that trade benefits everybody. So can I just ask everybody to put their hands together for my fantastic panel? And I will hand back to our compers.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chris Southworth and his panel did such a sterling job. Can we please give them another massive round of applause? A gentle reminder that will be valid for the next 3 days is if it's not documented in accordance with what the sport of running teaches us, it didn't happen. So I'd like to invite Mr. Chris Southworth and his panel back to the podium for a photograph. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. Give them another round of applause in the meantime. It's clear, Honorable SG, Honorable Minister, esteemed delegates, that navigating the global challenges, particularly at this time, is no walk in the park. But the golden thread, and that's my takeaway from this powerful panel, is the resilience of the Commonwealth. We have come a long way since 9 o'clock this morning, ladies and gentlemen. There's a lot to internalize. There's a lot to assimilate. There's a lot to digest. We will, gentlemen, the photographer is waiting.